all give a warm welcome to Bryan Finster. And firstly, Bryan, can you please introduce yourself and also give us a quick intro into continuous delivery for those of us who are a little bit new to it?
Sure. Thanks, Giles. Yeah, I've been a software developer since 1996. That's a while now. Mostly in the supply chain space, which also informs some of my mindset on how we're delivering software, because now I work on platforms it's like the supply chain of software, and a lot of the same principles apply when you really dig into it. I joined Walmart in 2001 and suffered through all sorts of nightmares dealing with legacy code for a lot of years. They sent us through PMI training and made us all the senior engineers, project managers, so I can speak to that and why we shouldn't do that. Then they sent us through several agile transformations, including finally a safe transformation, which that was terrible. And then we were delivering. So I'm working in the logistics area, delivering the main warehouse management system for most of Walmart's distribution centers, and that's a massive supply chain system. It's you're dealing with code that's like 25 million lines of 5 different languages. It's evolved with no architectural guidance whatsoever for 20 years. We were delivering that system 3 to 4 times a year, 4 if we're lucky. Every delivery had a scheduled 7 days of 24-hour support. And so, every release, it was like, okay, here's your schedule for when you're going to be working nights for the next week. And hopefully it'll last a week. Releases were generally 6 weeks late. One of the roles I had was leading the team responsible for integrating the 400 plus branches every quarter. And they all lasted for a quarter because of course they did. And then our SVP had read the Phoenix Project and he'd read Team of Teams, and he was an old school Walmart, which meant that he believed in grassroots improvement and not, I'm going to tell you what to do. And he put a challenge out to us as senior engineers and logistics to go and figure out, hey, I need you to figure out how to deliver over 2 weeks. I mean, our current lead time for change right then was a year. So if business were out for something, it would take us 12 months to get to production. And he wanted us to deliver he wanted us to figure out how to, the thing that we're doing now, let's do that every 2 weeks. And because we're wildly optimistic and, reasonably familiar with the domain, we had a lot of deep experience in the senior engineers in that area. We'd been in that space, that problem space for a long time. We knew it. Picked up a copy of continuous delivery. There was like 4 of us in a tiger team to try to figure this out. And including a project manager who quit because he said that we told him that we were going to go for daily and not every 2 weeks, because you never hit the mark that you aim for. If you're going to aim for mediocrity, you're not going to get there. Aim for excellence, you might get mediocre. And he said, well, they only want every 2 weeks. And Patrick and I were like, no, we're going to go for daily. And he said he quit. We're like, yeah, but we're super senior engineers. We know how to run projects. We don't need you. So Patrick went off and started building a platform for the area, and it was like him and 3 other guys putting together Jenkins templates to make it easy for teams to onboard. We went about going through and decomposing the warehouse management system and the business capabilities, and then building out a team structure that would do that. Told the SVP we need teams to look like this. We started building, not all of them all at once, because don't boil the ocean. We started building the teams that did that. And then we started learning how to go from can't deliver at all to how do we solve the problem of continuous delivery, continuous integration, all that stuff. Later took those lessons when we started building a global platform, and then it became my job to work directly with teams, very much like the Google test mercenaries. We would dive into teams and teach them continuous delivery. Learned a lot of problems from a lot of different contexts from doing that too. Now I work for Defense Unicorns. We are focused on how do we create secure delivery platforms for the U.S. Department of Defense. Well, first I try to educate them on what continuous delivery is and what it means. There's a lot of confusion first. I'll just clear this up. Continuous deploy and continuous delivery. Continuous deploy means that I'm going to make a change. It's going to go to version control, and then it's going to go to production. It's going to get fully tested, fully automated testing all the way through. If it fails the test, it's not going, but it's going to flow directly to production with no human intervention whatsoever. That's a use case for some things. It's not a use case for all things. It's not an ultimate goal. It depends on your delivery target. Continuous delivery means the current change is deployable. We can deploy it on demand, but we are always deployable, and the current, our latest code is deployable. That's what that means. It also takes a high level of quality maturity to get that done. In fact, before we started the global platform, and I got drafted into there, I went to the head of quality engineering for logistics and said that she needed to hire me to push this because this was not a delivery initiative. This was a quality initiative. And we needed to push this if we wanted to improve the quality in the area. Because you have to, just imagine, I'm going to make a change now, we're going to deploy it. Well, I'm also carrying the pager. I guarantee you I cared about testing. Well, before I go into why for that, I think people need to understand why we do continuous delivery, because it's not a whiz-bangy.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
This is super cool. There are specific reasons why I say that if you're not doing continuous delivery, you need to. And the reasons why is, first, that first experience we had when we got there, when we were delivering multiple times a day, just on my team, not in the broader organization. My team was delivering 5 to 10 times a day to production and getting feedback from a distribution center on feature requests, not even defects, okay? Which we could turn around within 24 hours because we had just gotten that good at breaking things down and delivering. But it was joyful. It was absolutely joyful. It just, the team morale is enough reason to push for CD. But from a business point of view, if you're not doing continuous delivery, you're a security risk. Any compliance you have is compliance theater. You can't respond to incidents without adding a lot of risk because you don't have a safe way to respond to incidents. You can't meet business goals if they change rapidly, and so there's all these business reasons for safety, security, compliance, and just frankly the bottom line to be pushing this way. Working now in the DoD, I tell people, it's like, if you can't do CD, you are a threat to national security. We need to fix you. Because it's just true. You can't respond to threats fast enough.
I'm quite jealous that in my day job, I can't say that to people. Like that would be quite a nice thing to be able to say to my boss,
Well, if you have, if they're regulated in any way, where like we have SOX in the U.S. for business, and you can get punished for things, that's also a threat. You could go to jail because you're not handling it. Right? So, but when I got into the dojo and we stood up this capability of showing teams how to do continuous delivery, and we had a very methodical engineering-based approach to, we're going to move you to CD. It wasn't the normal fuzzy agile coaching stuff. We were very kind about it and collaborative and made them feel like they were solving the problems instead of just doing what we said. But it was a very focused engineering-based process. And I started collecting the common problems that every team had. They wouldn't all have all of the problems, but all the teams would have some of these problems. And mostly with CI, because for almost every team in the world, CI is a choice that they can make. There's no outside thing that's going to stop continuous integration. Continuous delivery generally has some outside dependencies unless you're a very small product. But for continuous integration, for CI to work, we have to push tested code. Now, it doesn't have to be test-driven development. I would prefer that they did that. You wind up with cleaner code. I don't care if you do, but you cannot push untested code. And that's not just unit tests. We have to validate that this thing is deployable which means we have to have all of the acceptance tests that we've defined as our definition of deployable as part of every commit. Okay, so just think about that. The pipeline defines deployable, so I can't put stuff in there that doesn't have a definition in the pipeline to define whether it's deployable or not. Okay. The problem with that, though, is that number one, a lot of teams just don't know how to test because nobody's taught to test, not even testers for the most part. It's tragic, but true. But to learn how to test, you have to have something that you know what good looks like, which means you have to have requirements that are actually clear, which hardly anybody has, because what happens is you've got a product manager, product owner, or BA writing a user story-ish thing and then putting some bullet points. So it's kind of like this and telling you to figure out during implementation. That's what you're for. And so you wind up doing a lot of exploratory coding, and so testing becomes a waste of time because you're testing things that are the wrong thing to do anyway. And so you have these really common basic problems. Oh, and I forgot to mention, their work is just way too big. You've got 2-week sprints. Of course, people say, well, we can't get enough done in 2 weeks, so we'll have a 3-week sprint, which just makes crap worse. And you've got stories that are like, oh yeah, that'll take 2 weeks, because the Scrum guide says a story has to fit within a sprint or whatever. And the way that we approached it was like, look, to get CI working, we have to get things down to the size where we understand what it is and how to test it. We will never have a story bigger than 2 days. Now, that's not 2 days for a person. That's 2 days total for the team, because the team should be collaborating on whatever the highest priority is. But you could have a story broken up into tiny tasks that can be accomplished by the team in parallel, as long as you testing correctly, along with contract testing, all the layers of testing, okay? But to get down to the detail, we had to get really clean information from the product owner. So what do? We bring the product owner in. We introduce behavior-driven development. Behavior-driven development is the conversation. It's not a technology. It's the conversation where we say, this set of declarative tests for these business scenarios will pass, or these things will not happen, the negative tests. When all of these are true, this story is complete. Now I have a list of things that are that are black and white. It either does this or doesn't do this. That is my task list to complete the story. We can then break that down even further into lower level engineering tasks that we can complete very quickly. The team has come together to decide, including QA, which is we stop doing QC, we start doing QA. We have all come together and said, yes, we all agree that it should do exactly this, and this should take us less than 2 days. So we throw story points away and all that waste of having meetings with planning poker, and just I hate waste that way. We break everything down really tiny, and then we just start shipping. Now, there's some teamwork that they also struggle with, because a lot of organizations assign work. That's the worst possible thing you can do, because number one, it destroys collaboration. But also, if you tell me which stories I'm going to be working on this sprint, I don't care about the other stories. I care about my stories. And I'm going to focus on making sure my stories are defined correctly, but nobody else is going to help me because they don't care about those because they're mine. And if you want to incentivize teamwork, you need to, there's levers, and one of those is a pull system. I don't know which work I'm going to get, so I need to make sure it's all good, right? And so this is the thing the reason I focus on people so much is because I learned pretty early on that this is mostly a people problem, and you have to figure out how to get the best out of people and, appeal to their wants and needs as humans. I emulate empathy. It's not something that comes natural to me. Right. And so, but it's learning how to do that so you can organize the entire system of delivery around maximizing their potential to deliver quality, which is why I call myself now a value stream architect. Awesome. And there's a lot of stuff. I hope that.
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to digest there, and I wanted to kind of take a minute and say, does anyone have any questions off the back of that before we move on? Has anyone got? Does this resonate with anyone else? Yeah, I like that too, David.
I'm not joking about it either.
Otherwise, we'll carry on. So I'm kind of, I'm bought in. You've sold it to me, and I'm like, I want to go into my organization and say, right, continuous delivery. We're going to take this on. And I don't know, say I'm leading a team or a part of the organization. What should my first steps be? How would I take, from kind of, say, an organization like you described that takes a year to deliver a feature, and all of the bad kind of habits that I'm sure we've all seen in different organizations. How do we get to that promised land, that is, multiple deliveries a day, 2 days for a story, that kind of thing?
So the first part is how much does management care, right? So, I was very fortunate for that first situation we're in, and this would have been something that most people would have looked at and gone, that's way too scary. But we had an SVP who wanted it to be better, who didn't just say, you make it better, but was also actively engaged. He was being a leader instead of a manager, actively engaged in cheerleading and providing material support and clearing roadblocks outside the organization that we had. So I was very fortunate there. And I was also very fortunate that I also worked with a lot of smart people. I was not at all the smartest person in the room. But we all collaborated very tightly. We weren't competing with each other. We respected each other. And that made that a lot easier than a lot of organizations might have it. If you have that level of air cover, then you can do some strategy and come up with an approach that's less ad hoc. If you don't have that level of air cover, what I would do, honestly, is I'd go to my manager and say, hey, we're going to run some experiments to see how we can improve quality. And it's going to be a controlled experiment. We're not going to do anything dramatic or anything, but we think if we just slightly improved how we got our requirements defined in a way that's easier to test, that might elevate quality, right? And then sell it to the team. Hey guys, would it be great if we didn't have so much, no, that's not what I meant, I need an enhancement. And then we start arguing about whether it's a defect or not and waste all our time in meetings doing that. What if we tried this? And then just start on behavior-driven development. Let's clean up the requirements. And then if there's, the team feels some success about that, and I think this is good, what if we tried integrating code more frequently so we didn't have all the merge conflicts? And, I know we're using Git flow right now, but what if we, remove some of that toil, remove some of the uncertainty and the mistakes that we're making with this, and started just integrating code more frequently to develop instead of having these long-lived feature branches off of develop, and start getting good at that. And, of course, advertising to management, hey, there's the improvements we're seeing, and, measurable improvements. How were we delivering before? How are we delivering now? And show the trends, right? And then, hey, why are we're doing continuous integration, but we're not, there's this extra merge from develop to the trunk is not really adding any value. What if we just, merge develop in the trunk and just start working from there, and one step further. And so it's just going through the process of clearing the dependencies and dependency sequence and advertising what you're doing and marketing what you're doing, engaging the team, making sure that everyone's feeling good, making sure everyone's involved with solving the problems, nobody feels like a victim. And then start showing other teams. And that's the guerrilla way to do it. You'll learn quite a bit doing it. If your management doesn't support it, then what you should do is quit and go to someplace else and then do it there.
I'm glad you said that. So let's assume that we don't have to take the nuclear option, and assume because that kind of that's a straw man that doesn't kind of stand up so well.
But hang on.
Yeah.
With every success comes a failure.
Yeah.
Had a leadership change. New leadership burned my team and several other teams to the ground. And all the people who could get jobs quickly left. I went to another area. Other people left the company. People will quit when you take away how good they can deliver software.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear.
I think that's part of the reason why I'm so I love this, because it's genuine positive impact to people's day-to-day lives. Right? It's one of the few places like we can talk about mapping complexity, and we had other people on previously talking about, you know, kind of org charts and stuff like that, but actually something like CD changes the way that, you know, your day-to-day life is, and I think there's very few things that can have that level of impact.
The reason I'm so shouty about it is because
yeah.
it makes the work suck less. It helps the bottom line, but it helps the people.
Yeah.
So if you're in a multi-team area, you're probably not doing continuous delivery on your own. You're going to stop at CI because you're going to have external dependencies to the team. Okay, and that's when you start talking about all the other things that are constraints to you moving to more frequent delivery. And had to go through that too. We went and had, you know, Patrick and I would go and talk to QA, which was, we're changing their entire workflows. Many of them were very unhappy about that. You know, and even though their testers were testing worse than my team.
I mean,
we had to go talk to operations because they had a thing where you had to have a feature stable in production for, you know, 30 days before you could do KT and hit it over to them. Now, I didn't want them supporting me anyway. So when they refused to work with us and figure out a way that would work with continuous delivery and their operating method, my attitude was like, cool, now I can get support back, because that's a critical quality feedback loop that management took away from me 10 years before.
Yeah.
Okay. But we did spend, you know, we went and talked to the DBAs. We didn't have control of our database, and found a friendly DBA to work with and figure out how we can get them integrated into the flow. And you know, but in the case you're talking about, you have to talk to other teams that you have dependencies on or that depended on you, and talk about how can we manage our contracts in a way that are non-breaking, so I can deploy anytime I want and it doesn't hurt you at all. And, you know, we had to do that too. Now, we had a lot of teams focusing on CD, so it wasn't like I had to convince someone to do this. It was just, how do we do it? You know, what's the mechanics around it? And, you know, and we had rules. You know, no team you couldn't do anything that made it so two teams had to deliver at the same time. We were destroying the release trains and going to every team as a sports car, right? But that requires contract management, so we did that. But you need to find out what it is that's you know, it's the question I always tell people to ask. Stop doing the agile transformation crap. Why can't I deliver today's work to production and get feedback today? And then solve all of the problems. Yeah. And a lot of them are organizational or people, and you just have to be patient and build relationships and solve the problems.
No, go.
Yeah, so when we started, we would write code, and then we had a team that was writing an end-to-end test suite. We didn't tell them to go away. We're going to start testing now. We started building out our test suite. So on the team that I was on, and by the way, I was talking to someone earlier today, and it's not enough to have influence. You really need to be on the team. At first, I just had influence, and none of the teams would do anything. And my manager was like, "You guys keep talking theory, and nothing's happening. I'm just making a tech lead again. Let's see if we can get this done." You know, we started building out. You know, how do we do front end testing properly with page object models instead of Selenium through the front end? How do we decouple the services from each other so we don't have to, not depending on end-to-end test? We were building things with clean domain boundaries. So if I tested A and I tested B and I tested C, AB works and BC works and ABC works, and I don't have to test ABC. And that's not a theory. We did that. Okay. And so how do we test all of the layers. I started digging into Martin Fowler's, testing microservices blog. You don't have to build microservices. It applies to anything that's service oriented. The layers of testing. How do you test the interfaces independent of your dependency? How do you validate that virtual service is correct? Focusing mostly on business flow tests within a component, but don't go outside the component, because there's like this design to make reliable, comprehensive tests that are fast, not just throw unit tests and everything. And so I dug in deep into testing, and I was a page ahead of the team the whole time, just a page, right? I didn't even know Angular. I put together a framework for this is what a test using page object model looks like. You guys, I'm busy. You guys take it forward. I had no idea. I wasn't a JavaScript developer. I just kind of threw something together that was the right thing based off of what it should do, and they took it forward. We built out a test suite that was very comprehensive, and then we kept failing all the time because of the QA test suite was always leading, lagging, or the way they were testing, instead of like using our services to add stuff and then see if that happened on the other end, they were injecting data directly into our database, and they thought that was a good test. And so I went to QA and said, look, you can audit us, please audit us, but this team, this testing team you've given us, another team could probably make better use of them. And then we were doing the testing. But it's a journey, and hopefully your QA teams are much better than that, and that they can start coming in and helping accelerate that process of learning how to test, because we didn't know how.
Yeah.
But we evolved our test suite to the point where we were getting stopped by QA, and at that point we took it over. Yeah, and I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like sending me a schema in email or Confluence. What we did was, we weren't using Swagger yet, but we did have JSON objects, because we were using REST. So we had JSON objects defined for, this is what my contract looks like, that I could go to, like your repository and pull the shape of your contract and test against it. Now that's the basics. It's like I have a way to validate that I'm consuming your contract correctly, and I'm also going to publish that so that you know that you're going to consume my contract correctly. We can write tests against each other, and anytime we did any sort of change whatsoever, we always started with that team lead, my team lead, whoever needed to be involved. We're going to talk about what the contract change is, define the contract test, and then we'll start from the contract and work in. We're not going to, I don't need to test that you work correctly. I just need to test that our contract is met. But then we also had a rule that because every team had to be able to deliver in any sequence at any time, you could not make breaking contract change. You can't be lazy and delete or rename a property. You can't be lazy and delete and rename a column on a database. You have to migrate to a new property, migrate to a slightly different schema. And I always put a versioning scheme in any new API I build. I have never gone to version 2. Right? I mean, since then, never had a version 2, because it's just evolutionary. I can remove stuff because I know no one's using it, but it takes time. And so you're always thinking, I have to be backwards compatible. I can't break my customers, who are the people consuming my contract. You have to treat them like customers. That's one other thing I want to talk about real quick. A lot of APIs suck. Apply some developer experience, thought, mindset. It's like, don't produce an API that you hate. Use it yourself, see what it feels like, and then make it suck less, because it slows people down. So I'll say with the DoD, that's not a problem we're trying to solve, because my company's working on, helps them stand up delivery platforms. So we're not integrating anything directly with any DoD resources at all.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always happy to educate any of them on how to do this properly, though, because otherwise life sucks. Later on, the way that I always told teams that we should be doing this the way that my team did it in the dojo, because we weren't just theoreticians who stopped coding. We also had a product we were developing inside platform. We would use Open API to document things. We gave demonstrations on how to use tools like Makito or Montebank to create virtual services, and say, as a producer of an API, you should also produce a virtual service that people can consume, so to make it easy to test. Make it very easy for people to test. If you create a contract test for against your Swagger document, and then there's tools out there that you can point directly at a Swagger document and will create a virtual service. You don't have to go code anything, but make sure it's tested. And then it's just a working agreement, no breaking contract change. If you break your contract, you're a bad actor. If an integration test fails because of a breaking contract change, they need to open a ticket against you. It's not their fault. You broke your contract. Well, and you have to also, my perspective on this, how I came to, learning how to test. So, when I was developing before this, I was a full stack developer, but that's only because the front end was 80 by 24 green screen. I mean, I was, it's your full stack because you're using C through the entire stack, right? And the green screen has no intelligence to it. You don't have to test the front end because it's just a form. But saying that, I approached front end testing the same way I approached back end testing. And what I came to realize was that the only difference between front end and back end, other than it needs to look pretty, right? But from a functional point of view, the API is just focused at meatware instead of silicon. You need to test the API and make sure it's functioning correctly, right? But the principles are still the same. I would still test the APIs independent of any business logic if it was in there, and then I would test the business logic. It's slicing it up. The problem when coming through the front end and integrating everything together is a test is supposed to be a scientific experiment. We need it to do this exactly. As soon as we lose control of our variables, we can no longer control that experiment, and we can't get, if I run the same test 20 times in a row and do not get the same result, I can't use that test. I might use it outside the pipeline to indicate something might possibly be wrong that we need to look at, but I can't use it for acceptance criteria. I can't use it for acceptance testing at all. It's not deterministic. So I have to design my tests so they always return a break is always a break. A pass is always a pass, and we trust it, right? And so it takes a lot of design. That means removing state as much as possible, or it means decoupling from dependencies as much as possible. I use virtual services because you can test stuff with virtual services that you cannot test with direct integration. I can add latency. I can add instability in a controlled manner to find out how this will respond to this failing, right? And you cannot do that with direct integration. There's use cases for direct integration to validate your virtual services, but not as acceptance tests. And at least I wouldn't use them that way. I'm terrified. I'd rather not wait. I'd rather not be at 3 o'clock in the morning during an incident trying to deploy with a failing test and not know if it was true or not. I optimize. I have a logo. It says, "Don't be Batman. Optimize for sleep." I've carried a pager for a long time. I guarantee you, I optimize for it. I'm going back to sleep. So it's the same sort of design principles. It's just that layer that's focused at the meat takes some different techniques because of the technology to make sure things are happening correctly. And I always point people to Kent C. Dodd's blog posts on. Now, he's mostly focused at React, but it doesn't matter. It applies to everything. His blog posts and also the testing library that he maintains for multiple languages. Those are really good tools for doing that. You don't need Selenium or any other of the big outside in things to test the front end fully. You just need Mocha Chai, the XUnit framework. You can do everything you need to do. They need to be customer centric. I mean, number one, they need to be focusing on the end user we're trying to deliver to, but they also need to be focused on their internal customers. And I use this very deliberately. When I joined that first team as tech lead again, finally, I had one-on-one meetings with the product owner, the scrum master, the BA, because we had both a product owner and BA, and explained to him that my role as the tech lead was to clear technical impediments, and I reported to the team because they were the ones delivering value. I told the product owner his job was to make sure that the team had clean business requirements to answer questions. He reported to the team because they were the ones delivering value, so on, right? And you really need to be focused on team. That we as a team work together. We're not competing with each other, even if we don't have the same report structure. We are on a mission together, and you have to operate like a high functioning unit. You cannot be in competition. You can't be, I'm really happy coding on this portion of the system. I'll just work on this. No, that's not allowed. You're harming the team first. And so if you have that team first mindset and customer centric focus, friendly APIs, we're delivering value, not code, that sort of thing. You really need this intense focus on quality and collaboration to get it done. I've got some specific answers because 3 years ago, Defense Unicorns, I started on day one and we were 6 people. And I'll say that we've been self-funded this entire time. So when I say that we've grown beyond, 115, 120 people, it's not because we're over hiring, because we got VC money, if you follow me, right? We've got work. So onboarding is something that I worry about a lot. And I'm not a founder, I'm just an individual contributor, but I know what happens when you scale. I've worked at scale, right? Simple stuff. How do we, number one, for example, if we've got like repositories with GitHub Actions, how do we simplify those and make them super common? How do we speed up onboarding by making sure people know where to find the information they need? Make sure that any repository that you have internally, pretend like it's open source and you want people to know how to use it, because your new people need to onboard quickly, and so make sure the documentation on how to start up and run those things is super easy. Eliminate tribal knowledge as much as possible. And this is the thing that drives me crazy. Oh, we're a startup. We don't have to worry about quality. Okay, look, you're doing MVP wrong. Test your damn code, because that's the documentation for how it works. And so, just focus on how do I get them up to speed and knowledgeable about the system as rapidly as possible. And that's tests and good documentation is what I would focus on, honestly. And like I said, things like commoditizing flows in actions or whatever process you're using, so people don't have to make them up on their own all the time. So it depends on your corporate culture. I don't know everybody's corporate culture. I know that Walmart's corporate culture is all about grassroots improvement, especially among the gold badges. And so there's a lot of enablement pushed down. Okay. Number one, if you're trying to get people on board to continuous delivery broadly, nobody is going to believe it unless they felt it, and they'll never go back once they have. And so it's that bridging. It's a huge gap to bridge, that emotional, that can't possibly work, which I'm sure people have seen me have those conversations with people. That can't possibly work. Well, yeah, except it does. Bridging that gap means building excitement and people understanding that not only do they have permission, but they'll be rewarded for trying. And so we were hosting internal DevOps days at Walmart to build the excitement. Of course, the problem with an internal DevOps day is that you have excitement around the event, and then people go back to the day jobs, right? And so my wife, who's currently InfoSec at Walmart, we were sitting down at lunch, and Randy, my SVP, had a habit of just sitting in the cafeteria just in case anybody wanted to talk to him about how to improve things. Just think about that. And so we sat down next to Randy, and she said, we really need to figure out how to get another DevOps day done. He said, okay, we'll go do that. She worked in a completely different structure of the organization, and he funded her putting together a DevOps day. because it was important. But as part of that DevOps day, she also brainstorms like, look, we need to figure out a way to keep the conversation going. So let's just start a user community and take that forward, and so that we can keep the conversation going. And so at the end of the DevOps day, she said, hey, we're going to start this user community. It's called Continuous Chai. We're going to be meeting every month. Then for a while accelerated to weekly because we had so many contributors. And you don't come with everything you're doing that's great. Come with everything you're trying, whatever it is. And those first few meetings were like me and her and the head of delivery platform and like one other guy. But you have to be consistent and show up or the meeting dies. And then advertise, hey, we had this meeting and here's the awesome things we discussed that you missed, right? And then we just grew the community. When I left Walmart, that community on our Slack channel had like 2,500 people in it. Now, they weren't all active participants, but people were listening because they were on the Slack channel. That community spread to India. And, COVID killed it, unfortunately, because people like in person. But there was so much sharing going on all the time from that community. And people asking help like this, right? How do I get this in my area? Can you come give a presentation to my, senior director and talk about these things? We had the CTO giving presentations. We had panel discussions with SVPs that would come in because it was important to them. And so community is a really powerful way. Communities grow really fast, by the way, when SVPs gives presentations because people want to be seen. So we always went after senior executives to show up because, you just got to know how to incentivize people.
Yeah.
Well, let me give you some success and failure stories there. First, because we were doing continuous delivery at Walmart, doesn't mean Walmart was doing continuous delivery. There's pockets that were doing it well. There's pockets that weren't, right? And that's true with anybody who's up on stage talking about CD, unless they're in like an organization that's got like 40 people in it.
Yeah.
The ability to be enabled when COVID happened allowed not us, but allowed store systems to spin around changes for touchless checkout rapidly, very rapidly. And I remember that a store sent us a crayon written letter from two sisters. Sorry, hear about the customer. Thanking us for keeping them safe. Right? But there's other things where changes don't happen like that and things fail because teams aren't doing it that way, and they double down on things like CAB, and and it's just it's that imagination gap.
Yeah.
They just can't imagine how to make it better, so they don't, and they double down on bad things. And so how do we get people to imagine what it could be like and feel that? Because it's true in every context, I swear.
That makes sense. No. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I know we're getting short on time. I want to make sure that, at DevOps Enterprise Summit, several of us came together and put together, I was ranting about people saying they were doing continuous delivery when what they meant was they had build and deploy pipelines, or they deployed on demand once a month because their customers didn't need it more frequently than that, after lots of manual testing and crap. So we were sitting at the bar during virtual summit because it was COVID, and we came up with the idea of minimumcd.org. What was the minimum set of behaviors that you would need to be practicing? And this isn't fuzzy, it's not principles. It's like you're doing this behavior or you're not doing this behavior, okay? What are the minimum set of practices to meet continuous delivery that works in every context? And I mean all of them. One of my use cases is delivery to a submarine. So CD, you're not connected to the internet, still need to do CD. You're not going to the cloud, right? And so we put together this minimum list. People came up with ideas that were good ideas, but they weren't minimum. So we put them in the good ideas list on the page. People came up with things that only applied to like the cloud, didn't apply to all contexts. We cut it. mention on another page, hey, this is a good idea for the cloud. But we put that together in about 3 days, started getting signatures from attendees at DevOps Enterprise Summit. I sent it to Dave Farley, who I had never talked to other than like interacting on Twitter before, like commenting on his posts, and said, hey, Dave, would you take a look at this and give us your feedback? And he made a one-word change to one of the practices and submitted his signature to it and said, this is good. And he's talked about this before. And I know for a fact that there's large organizations who have told me that they're using this as part of their effort to improve. They're using this as the roadmap. So people are finding value in it. The other one I want to talk about real quickly is dojoconsortium.org. The Enterprise Dojo Consortium is a group of practitioners who've had enterprise dojos who share information, like Walmart talking to Target, about how to help teams improve in a very disciplined way. We have a very disciplined process for it. But we stood up the website, and I was able to open source all the playbooks my team had generated from the Walmart Dojo that we were trying to scale this information out because we're a small team with 20,000 developers, and we can't just have one-on-one conversations and make any change. So this was one of our strategies, was these playbooks. So there's a lot of information that this is not theoretical. This is all the information that we harvested from helping teams directly. These things actually work.